Ohio State can still win it all, but there are flaws to clean up. That is my main takeaway, the thesis of all of my takeaways from the Big Ten championship game. When you suffer your first loss since November of last year, you go a full 365 days without suffering a loss. And in that time frame, you go 4-0 against FPI top 10 teams in last year's playoffs. You beat Texas, the preseason number 1 team. You beat Penn State, you beat Washington, you crush Michigan in their own place. You're the number 1 team in power ratings and the favorite to win it all. And your first loss is against an undefeated team with an elite coach, with the best quarterback in America who's going to win the Heisman, and it's by 3 points. You can win it all. You can. I mean, Indiana's number 1 in FPI right now, and they're number 2 in S&P Plus. They're number 1 in FEI. They are either the number 2 or number 1 team in America. Indiana is, according to most power ratings. I think they are certainly top 3 in power ratings, and in terms of the most deserving ranking, they are unanimously number 1. The only undefeated team beat Ohio State. They beat Oregon. You get the picture. This loss does not take anything away from Ohio State. This game told me nothing about the Buckeyes, in my opinion, that I didn't already know. They are unanimously top 2 in power ratings, and like with Indiana, I think Ohio State at the very worst right now is the 3rd best team in America. I say that for both because I do believe Georgia deserves to be in that top 3 conversation. They're not going to be in power ratings because they started the year off slower and they did play a tougher strength of schedule than the Buckeyes and the Hoosiers did, and their style of play is a little bit different, but I think they deserve to be up there regardless. Those are the 3 favorites per the books, per ESPN's bracket picks from the public, per my eyes, and actually per even, I believe, the power ratings to win it all when you look at ESPN's FPI. So that's takeaway number 1, and that's the most important thing, because if Ohio State wins it all, well, the season's automatically a success. I think because of the Michigan win, the 12 regular season wins, and the fact that a lot of this team's coming back next year, if they simply win a playoff game or 2, I think the season is a success. It may not feel that way with how phenomenal this defense is, though, and that's another takeaway that I have from the Big Ten championship game. This is the first team since 1975 Florida to not allow an opponent to score, I think it's either 20 points flat or more than 20 points in the regular season, or maybe it's they haven't allowed a team to score more than 16 points in the regular season. This is a historic defense. Let's say somehow in the playoffs they allow a 30 or 40 burger and lose. That'd be disappointing, but this defense would still be remembered for holding Indiana to 13 points. And if Indiana somehow makes that field goal, it's still 16. That's really impressive. For holding Texas to 7, for holding Michigan to 9, despite an interception basically inside of Michigan's red zone or very close to it, and for holding opponents to under 9 points per game in the regular season and conference championship week. They're only allowing 0.156 points per play. That is the best since 2021 Georgia. That is wow. And with players like Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caden McDonald, Caden Curry, who has 11 sacks after a phenomenal performance in Indianapolis, Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, Kenyatta Jackson Jr., you get the whole picture. It's full of NFL studs. They have an NFL defensive coordinator. The defense by a mile is the strongest side of the football. Not a whole lot changed for me after watching that game from Ohio State. Something that did change for me is that I earned a respect for both defenses, and I didn't lose respect for either offense, but I did realize that both offenses maybe have more vulnerabilities than I expected or thought, or the defenses are so much better than I believed them to be that they made the offenses look a little bit pedestrian at times. But the defense, for Ohio State in this matchup was phenomenal. I give it an A+ grade. It was the best side of the football. Same thing with Indiana's defense, and Ohio State's defense is the best in college football to this date. Wide receiver 1 and 2 for Ohio State are elite. That's another takeaway I had from this game. Were they targeted a ton? Not necessarily, but Indiana also did a great job disguising their coverages, sending pressure. The early interception definitely rattled Sayin and made him question things in his confidence, and the receivers weren't always open. D'Angelo Pons did a good job covering Jeremiah Smith. This channel will make you a college football expert and help you enjoy watching games and make more accurate predictions. So what are you waiting for? Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, comment your thoughts, and watch the video all the way through so that you can get the full package. And check the description and pinned comment for more ways to help yourself and this channel. Smith just sometimes made some catches because he's that good. Jeremiah Smith in this draft, if he were eligible, would be round 1, pick 1. Unless a team at the top desperately needed a quarterback, he would be round 1, pick 1. He's the most talented player in college football. He's the best player in college football. The Heisman deserves to go to him or Fernando Mendoza, is who it deserves to go to. And Carnell Tate, he's made so many strides from where he was last year. He's better in every way. And last year he was phenomenal. But this year, he's even rivaling Jeremiah Smith in terms of overall ability and performance. And that's impressive. There were so many plays later in the game, and even earlier in the game, where it felt like Indiana was breathing down Ohio State's neck. They really always were. But then, as were customary to with Ohio State, the receivers bailed Ohio State out. And why do they bail Ohio State out? It's not because Ohio State's a bad team that happens to have great players. It's because they're a great team that then has elite NFL receivers to where even against one of the best defenses in college football, they can bail themselves out of trouble when the run game isn't working or the pass protection isn't working, and they can find a way to extend drives. This we already knew, obviously. A lot of what I am telling you are things that we already knew because these teams have played in 12 games before, but it's good to refresh our memory because sometimes there can be overreactions or sometimes things can get missed. Something I want to discuss with the offensive line here. It had a really bad night, but this isn't something that is surprising to me. I would have been surprised if Ohio State did well in pass blocking against this Indiana defense. I would have been shocked if they looked good in run blocking. This offensive line is the first for Ohio State in a minute that does not have an alien starting for it. They don't have a Donovan Jackson. They do not have a Paris Johnson Jr. They don't have some of those Urban Meyer offensive linemen that were a lock to be in the first round or just absolutely phenomenal centers. It's a good unit for the FBS, but against an elite defense, it's going to have a matchup disadvantage against the best defenses in college football. It's going to have a massive matchup disadvantage. The run game was a mess. I mean, Bo Jackson, the longest and most productive runs he had were more so because of him than the blocking. There were some nicely blocked plays, don't get me wrong, but those were few and far between, and more often than not, it was Bo Jackson's legs that kept any part of the ground game going. Phillip Daniels, especially Tegra Shabola, struggled in pass protection, but there were some reps where even the left side of the offensive line were got as well. Neither of the offensive linemen received good grades from PFF. They did not look great in the game. Later in the game, as Shabola got subbed out and Van Sickle came in, they looked better. But I also did notice a change in strategy from Ohio State where they were, slowing things down and trying to go with more of a quick game. They involved some trick plays. They tried to change some things up. And I think that caught Indiana off guard and helped take the game away from where Indiana wanted it to be. Indiana wanted Ohio State to try to go deep and to try and force passes deep. And they played that for a while because Ohio State wanted to be aggressive, as they've tried to be ever since that Michigan loss last year. And that's good. It's a really good thing. But with the offensive line situation, deep passes, even with these receivers, need time to develop. And while Sayan had enough time to get the ball out in quick situations, when things needed to develop, or he needed to make a quick decision, or he needed to fit the window, or he needed to fit the ball into a tight window, Indiana was either good enough in coverage to discourage him from doing that, and they were also good enough in coverage to give the pass rush time to get home. And sometimes the pass rush straight up got home. It isn't all on the offensive line, though. That's why I said gettable. I'm not saying the unit is horrible, but against the top-end defenses, it is going to be got. It just is what it is. Is the same thing last year in the playoffs, though, and Ohio State still won it all because they had elite pass blocking running backs, they had 3 NFL receivers, and they had a quarterback in Will Howard who had some legs, who could provide a numbers advantage in the ground game, and who, did a really good job with his veteran presence and, great footwork of evading pressure. Sayan is about as good as Howard there. He's not as veteran, though, so I don't think the decision-making is quite as crisp. But Ohio State doesn't have the elite pass-blocking running backs, and they have 2 NFL receivers and not 3. I don't think Innis is there quite yet, even though I think he's good and undervalued. So that was something that I hope we already knew. I already knew that. But I think a lot of people after the Michigan game thought the Ohio State offensive line is peaking, and no. It's they have issues that need a full preseason of work and another year under that staff to fix. The good news about that is, again, Ohio State can probably win it all in spite of those issues, and this entire core should come back next year and be better with another good year of coaching and development. The final piece I want to leave everyone with, and I think this is something that for a lot of people was new. For me, it wasn't, but this solidified it. And I wasn't totally confident in my thought that this Ohio State team was limited in ways that last year's team was not, because they were undefeated. Ryan Day's an elite coach. He runs the number 1 program in college football, and that's true even after this loss to Indiana in the Big Ten title game. But as I mentioned earlier, they don't have 2 NFL running backs. They only have 2 NFL receivers instead of 3. And at this point, you would probably take Will Howard's ability to create the threat of the run and that big body and strong legs to be able to go in a QB power situation with a numbers edge. And you'd also probably take who he was in the playoffs over who Sayan is right now. And you realize that on top of Donovan Jackson no longer being on the O-line, you think, wow, holy cow, this offense is still wonderful, but the amount of aliens they had has been basically halved from where it was last year. And that makes it that much easier for the best defenses to defend this offense compared to last year's offense, which Texas and Indiana had phenomenal game plans for, and they still were able to score, in the low 20s purely from offensive plays by themselves because they were that good and that dynamic to put together enough plays to win games and to keep games within their control. This team isn't quite that good offensively. Defensively, I'm as close to as ever in saying that maybe this defense is better than last year's, because holding this Indiana offense to 13 points, even though I know Indiana had some plays they probably wanted back, that's very impressive. Indiana's offense across the board is better than it was last year. As a team, they are probably better at every position than they were last year. Most notably along the offensive line, at special teams, and I would actually say at quarterback. Mendoza's accuracy is night and day different and better than Curtis Rourke, who a lot of the time was, he hit his receivers with enough accuracy for them to catch it, but he was not on target, as in ball to torso, ball to chest, nearly as much as Fernando Mendoza is. So Ohio State simply played an Indiana team that is way better than it was last year, and they themselves, I think, are worse than they were last year. But last year, they were in their own tier. They were the best team in America by, at the end of the year, probably a touchdown compared to the second best team. They're not that. They're not that team this year. They could be the best in power ratings. I think at very worst, they're behind Indiana and Georgia and probably no one else at this point. That's at worst. At best, they're still the number one team in America, and they just happen to lose to number two or number three. But they are going to have to do an even better job at mitigating any weaknesses they have compared to last year because they just aren't overwhelmingly better than the rest of the field from a roster angle. They are overwhelmingly better than most teams from a roster angle, but this year's Georgia and this year's Indiana, I think, along with, maybe a full strength Oregon, are more of a threat to Ohio State than any team last year was to the 2024 Buckeyes. They can still win it all. This is still an elite team with an elite operation. No, I do not think Ohio State had a terrible game plan against Indiana, though I think they certainly had some bad calls and needed to make better adjustments. Everything is fine. The loss sucks. It's painful. This team still has bigger and brighter things ahead of it if they simply take the opportunity, learn from their mistakes, mitigate their weaknesses, and try to play to their strengths. And it also depends because they're, not as dominant over the rest of the fields they were last year. It also does depend to a certain degree what their opponent brings to the table. This Ohio State team, I think, could play their absolute best game, and Georgia could still get them and beat them, for example, and maybe Indiana too. So keep that in mind. It's a wonderful team. There's a reason they're the favorites to win it all, and we'll just have to see what happens. Thank you for watching. It's my mission on College Football with Sam to make you the most informed, knowledgeable, and entertained fan as possible. We aren't perfect, but we hit the nail on the head more often than we hit our thumb with the hammer. Make sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, comment, and if you're here, you've probably already watched the whole video. So thank you for doing those things.